Hi, come read with me. This is Violet, and I'm reading from my autobiography, Six of One, Half a Dozen the Other. And if you're enjoying these stories, and it looks like you guys are, please like and subscribe and let me know what inspired you or what impressed you or what made you laugh or what made you cry. There's there's a lot in there. Just please share your thoughts with me so I can see what's happening there. So the next chapter is called Puddles. And I started out with a little poem here that I found. It says, excuse me, dirt and deity. If gutter puddles, after rain, can always look on high, and even with a floor of mud can have a roof of sky, I never wonder anymore how man, a pool of blue, can at the bottom gather mud and mirror heaven too. Louis Ginsberg. After the rain would cease, it was wonderful to go outside into the freshly washed world. The air was sweet and fresh, the birds would be singing, and there were always plenty of mud puddles. Mud puddles were useful for lots of things. You wouldn't think so, would you? There were invariably a few stranded earthworms in the puddles, in danger of drowning. If we acted quickly enough, we were able to rescue them from their plight and save a life or two. Earthworms are useful for recycling the dirt, but for some reason, they were always special to me. I thought they were interesting to watch. Earthworms also played a part in my character development. When I was very small, I tended to pout, and when I did not get my way, Mama would sing this little song to me. Worms. Nobody likes me, everybody hates me. I'm going to eat some worms. Big fat juicy ones, little bitty skinny ones. I'm going to the garden and eat worms. This song helped me to change my attitude. Mud puddles were great for splashing in, and if they were on the sidewalk, for sliding in too. Our front sidewalk, which led out to the picket fence near the road, was slanted downward from the house to the fence. The grass at the end of this walk and near the bottom of it was higher than the cement. After a good rain, a fair amount of water collected in this lower area. Not wanting to miss an opportunity for some good, clean fun, we made good use of the rainwater. We found an old rear seat from an automobile, perhaps the old black car, and by turning it upside down with the leather upholstery facing the sidewalk and the springs on top, we were able to make a great ski board. We would start at the top end of the puddle, placing the seat in the water and shoving off with our feet. The momentum of the car seat would send the water in front of it, and we would ride it as far as we were able. If you were really good, you might create such a wave as to ride all the way to the top end of the sidewalk on the way back. This game would continue until, by process, the water was fully eliminated from the sidewalk and we had to move on to other games. Mud puddles had not always been so much fun for me. At one time, they were a fearsome thing to be avoided. When the rains came and stayed till the ground was saturated, the puddles would collect green, fluffy algae on the sides and on the bottom of the puddles. I was about 5, and I was bending over looking into one of these puddles. The sky was mirrored in the puddle, and it looked like it was miles deep. I was curious about the algae. Some of the kids called it froggy. While I was engrossed looking at the puddle, Randall and Fonda decided to take full advantage and use it as another opportunity to tease me. They grabbed hold of my arms, pretended to throw me into the pool. They said I would go down there, meaning into the miles-deep water. I believed them, and from that day until I was old enough to understand how harmless puddles are, I walked with a wide girth around any puddles I came near, lest I fall in and be lost. Clouds, like puddles, were also a free source of entertainment. When we had nothing else to do, we would lie on our backs in the green grass and watch the clouds shift. There would always be some interesting shape to discover in the constantly changing clouds. We would look for faces, animals, monsters, and other shapes that we would point out to each other. This is still a game I enjoy when the clouds are especially interesting. Other games we played we conjured up on the spot, and were not always as docile as watching the clouds. And then the next chapter is toys and taunts. I'm just going to continue on with this one. In 1958, while Daddy was taking the woodworking class at Fresno City College, he went to Fresno Ag Hardware and purchased a shopsmith on credit for a little over $300. Since they were still on welfare, the monthly payments of $90 a month was a tremendous hardship on the family budget until the saw was paid for. He set up the shopsmith in the dining room because we had no garage. When he ran the saw or the lathe, sawdust and chips would fly all over the house. I loved the smell of the wood chips and the spirals of thin wood from the plane he used to shape whatever he was making. But the house was continuously covered in a fine layer of sawdust until we moved to a house with a garage. Mama was probably much relieved when we finally moved to a house that had space for him to work in. Daddy took a particular liking to cedar wood, which not only smelled good, was beautiful, but of course was the most expensive to buy. He sliced the wood into 1/4 inch thin pieces and then cut it into small perpendicular pieces, which he then glued into intricate patterns and fashioned into cabinets for china. Some cabinets he made for relatives, if they were willing to pay for the wood. He made one for our pastor, but never made one for Mama. She could not afford to buy the wood. He did make cedar chests for us girls as we grew near marrying age. Mine had 3 diamond-shaped patterns on the front constructed of molding. One large diamond in the middle had a smaller one on either side. He learned how to turn wood on the shopsmith to make many things. One of the projects he tried was making yo-yos and hardwood spinning tops for us. The yo-yos were shaped like butterflies instead of having rounded outside edges. They were wedge-shaped. We had hours and hours of fun trying to make them work. They were actually pretty well balanced. The spinning tops were fun too. They had grooves along the bottom half where we wrapped a string around till all we had room for was one fingertip in the end of a loop of string. The wooden top was held inside the first 2 fingers and was released on the outward thrust of the arm. As the hand jerked back, it caused the top to spin and spin. Once, when Joyce was about 13 years old and I was 11, we became bored and began looking for things to entertain us. There was an old metal advertising sign, and we had fun shaking it to make a whop, whop, whop sound. Another time, we found an empty square-shaped 1-gallon gas can out in the yard to play with. We found out that when we kicked, the can made a loud noise. One of us discovered that by kicking the can while simultaneously pretending to slug the other person, we could create some pretty convincing special effects. We were always careful to stop short of hitting the other person in the jaw while at the same time kicking the can with the heel of our foot. It was all very impressive and required precision timing and coordination for the sound of the can to correspond to the pseudo hit. It was my turn, and I tried a couple of times with great success. I was really getting into this game. Then all of a sudden, just as I kicked the can with a loud bang, my fist connected with her jaw in a loud thud of its own. Joyce and I had, up to this time, never fought much. But this time, although I insisted it was an accident, Joyce wasn't buying my story. I had gone beyond the limit. She chased me around the house 3 times before she finally gave up and the idea of killing me. In spite of this falling out, Joyce and I were still very close until she started high school. Then things really began to change. Not only our relationship was changing, but so was Joyce. She very quickly developed a figure. Joyce was blossoming, but she was bashful about it. Her posture began to reflect the new figure, and she began to slump as if she desired to hide the evidence of her new development. I was a great one for making up songs and rhymes, and this time Joyce was the recipient of my writing prowess. I was still skinny and flat-chested, so I could not relate to her new modesty. I had little compassion for the smarting nose I had caused her, because she obviously had murder in her heart as she pursued me. Joyce, like me, was very hard on the waistlines of her dresses. She had a red dress which had begun to strain at the seams. The gathered waistline gave way while she was chasing me around the house. Then, being unable to catch me, she had gone into the house to sulk. I did not take rejection very well, and she was snubbing me. I was hurt. It was then that I received the inspiration for my tune. Fonda had recently been in a school production of Oklahoma, and as she practiced, I learned some of the song by osmosis. I made up a little ditty to the tune of June is busting out all over. Joyce is busting out all over, I sang at the top of my lungs. This was more than her already wounded ego could take. The song made her furious. Out the front door and down the steps and around the house we went again, with Joyce in hot pursuit. Fortunately for me, she never did catch me. Things were never quite the same between us after that. She was a freshman in high school and began to develop her own friendships. Soon she too had boyfriends, and after that I was just the pesky little sister. Joyce was not the only victim of my songs and impromptu poetry. At one time or other, I used my imagination to write a little ditty about all of the children. I was about 12 years old at the time, and I got the idea to make up rhymes using one of the children's names, starting from the oldest. They went like this. Dolores the horse is a horse, of course. Handy Randy wanted some candy. Her name is Lorilla. Her nickname's Gorilla. For short, we call her Ape. That was Fonda's. Joyce the Pain sat out in the rain. Bert the Squirt was a flirt. Rex Eugene, the screaming machine. Cranky Frankie got a spanky and needed a hanky. Christine, Dorothy, Gerald, and Eileen were all too young at the time and escaped the taunting of my musical rhymes. Judging from the evidence, I would probably guess that I was unhappy with Fonda at the time that I wrote her rhyme. Having older siblings who were used to bossing the younger ones could really be a headache for the little kids. Dee, though, felt that it was more of a headache having to boss the younger ones, with the distinction of being the oldest, being in charge certainly put more responsibility on her than she desired. This was especially true when Mama would leave her in charge for the day. Her biggest problem was Randall. He did not feel the same way about being boss. At least he did not want to be bossed by her. It was not unusual for them to get into power struggles. These almost always had the same outcome. Dee, because she was instructed to be in charge, had to maintain her position of power. Randall usually lost the battle, but sometimes the war got pretty ballistic. Often during the conflict, someone would get locked out of the house or chased around the yard. Most of the time, these skirmishes did not digress to hand-to-hand combat, but occasionally more forceful means were implemented when necessary. When one person was in hot pursuit with no intent of withdrawal, shoes, potatoes, or any other handy ammunition would be thrown in the direction of the one giving chase. These projectiles seldom made contact, thankfully, but it was murder to get caught in the crossfire. Power struggles were not always so obvious. Personal space was fiercely guarded as well. Hearing the loud voice of one of the older children shouting, "Get out of my room," was a common occurrence. Personal space was important, though practically non-existent in our huge family. Even though we shared beds and bedrooms, there were certain things that were not viewed as public property. Keeping these things to oneself was often difficult, if not impossible. When the older children graduated to a semi-private room, as the older ones married and left home, the door to their room was as far as the rest of us were allowed to venture. The room was off limits to all who did not sleep there. The rest of us, though, had to be content to share a space with the little ones. I never quite managed to have a room of my own, but I did have a bed to myself for a little while. This was a rare luxury, and I took advantage of it by partitioning off a small corner of the room for myself. To do this, I took some old pink curtains that were faded and worn and dyed them a darker rose pink. I hung them on a wire from the ceiling above a large dresser that we had in the room. The space it created was almost like having a room of my own. The only thing about this partition is that it sagged in the middle. That gave Christine and Dorothy, who slept on the opposite side, a challenge. They would throw items like marbles, jacks, and other small toys, trying to get them over the partition onto my side of the room. but at least I no longer had to share a bed with him. There was, at one time, 5 of us girls who shared one bed. Ugh! This was the condition of my room when I first met Dell. He did not find it too strange that I did not have a room of my own, for he also had to share a room at times in his family of 5 children. He only saw my room once while we were dating. I was napping in the afternoon. I've always loved naps, still do. I was asleep on the top of the blankets. He unexpectedly came to visit me early, and Mama said he could wake me up if he wanted. He came into the room, and as in the story of Sleeping Beauty, woke me with a kiss. One would think that because our house was already too crowded with permanent residents, that no one would expect us to invite others into our home. What I mean is strangers. Mama was a very compassionate person and took charity seriously. If she was shopping and encountered a person begging for loose change, she would give them what she had. If a tramp came knocking on the door seeking food, she would give them a chore to do and then feed them. One night at church, she met a family who had arrived from Alabama and were living in their car. Do you think Mama considered that our beds were already full to overflowing? Absolutely not. She invited the family, a woman and her 2 teen-age daughters, to spend the night with us. We were given no choice in the matter. Joyce and I shared a relatively uncrowded bed at the time, and we had to make room for the new guests. Many years later, I wrote a little short story called Dirty Feet, which was inspired by this incident. You can have this article for free. Simply send an email to videlcalkins@yahoo.com with the subject line Dirty Feet. I will email it to you. As with the clothing and the food, it was difficult providing bedding and household items for a house with so many members. It was a real challenge for my parents, and they were always on the lookout for sales and auctions. Once, about 1964, they went to an auction of the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco. They bought sheets, something we had been lacking until then. Blankets, pillows, and bedspreads. These are things that most people take for granted, but to us they were a real luxury. Until they brought these bedding items home, I had never slept on sheets, did not own a pillow, and the only blankets I had known were homemade quilts. Mama used to buy bags of remnants from the second-hand stores and cut them into squares, sew them together, and make quilts. These were not fancy, but they served their purpose. She had one whole closet full of boxes of cloth remnants. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if I were to check. She might have them still. Now, just a side note here, when I wrote this story, she was still alive. She's since passed many years. In fact, Mama had just about everything somewhere in the house. It was an amazing thing. We could go to her house and ask, "Do you happen to have blank?" She would usually say, "I think I have it in the back room." Then she would go into the room and hunt for a minute or two and come out with the item requested. I suppose, like many from her generation who have gone through the Great Depression, she hated to get rid of anything, thinking it might be important someday. Sorry about that. Let me fix that. I have often heard her tell us that when she was a child, they did not even have a nail to hang their clothes on, and that they walked to school in the snow with holes in the bottoms of their shoes. It is hard for me to imagine anyone being more destitute than we were, but I suppose anything is possible.